So welcome everyone. I'm extremely pleased to be your moderator today, and I'm very honored to welcome our two amazing guests, Parine Mehta and Rob Beer. And before we dive into our discussion, let me share a quick backstory about why we're here and why we've decided to organize this discussion. So I landed in Singapore about 10 years ago, and shortly after I decided to follow my passion for coaching, and I left the corporate world. I became a professional coach and a personal trainer to help people be mentally, emotionally, and physically aligned to thrive in their life. And along the way, along this journey, I've worked with many startup founders, scale-up leaders, C-suite, top-level execs, and I've been coached myself. And I've seen the real, tangible change coaching can bring about. And that's why I've created and started Go Master Coach 4 years ago to amplify the effect of coaching. So what we do at Go Master Coach, we train people to develop certified coaching skills, and we equip them with impactful tools that we have developed on our digital platform. And throughout this journey as a coach, as a founder, meeting amazing people like Parine, like Rob, I've seen and we've seen the challenging path, how challenging it could be to succeed as an entrepreneur, as a founder. And we've seen the pressures, mental health challenges founders could face, burnout sometimes, all the doubts, the ambiguity founders and entrepreneurs face in their journey. And we've seen as well that coaching can be the game changer, and that's why we're here today together to talk about. And what we'll discuss today, we'll discuss about the problem founders face, we'll discuss how to support them as coaches, as leaders. We'll discuss what makes a great founder and what it takes to be a great coach. But most importantly, we'll get inspired by our awesome guests and their journey and their stories. And with no further ado, let me introduce Parine. So Parine, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time today. Parine is an investor, is a venture builder, and is an executive coach. Parine previously led Airbnb APAC and strategic partnerships for Google APAC. His passion lies in coaching founders to scale up their ventures. He also launched a newsletter. Please subscribe to it. It's really amazing. You will get amazing questions every week. He launched this newsletter during COVID. And Parine also launched a coach bot, which is really, really interesting. Parine graduated from Cambridge and from INSEAD, but probably most importantly, from Go Master Coach. That's a French joke. All right, thank you and welcome, Parine. Rob, so I'm very pleased to welcome Rob as well. So Rob Beer specializes in helping founders of startups and scale-ups to create high-performing organizations. Rob has a vast experience advising 8 unicorns, along with smaller startups, coaching senior leaders in venture capital, in private equity, in strategy consulting. He's a board advisor member at Crypto.com. He also founded and advised MoneySmart.com. And Rob is about to publish his second book, and the name is Smooth Scaling, 20 Rituals to Build a Friction-Free Organization. And I'm very excited because I'm sure we're going to get a lot of insights today from Rob, and we can't wait for this book to be published. All right, so let's get started. Now, I want to know more from you guys. Parine, Rob, can you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself, your journey, and what pivotal moment brought you here today where you are? Parin, if you can start.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Look, I think like many people, it's generally when we make big mistakes that we learn something, and then we reflect on it and try and make a change. And so my interest in coaching developed just over 10 years ago when I was really leading teams for the first time. And it maybe took me longer than I should have, but I realized I had no idea what I was doing, and was recommended, or let's call it strongly suggested, or let's call it mandated, to get some help to be in leading a team for the first time. And so I experienced this interaction with someone where, frankly, I found it very frustrating because they weren't telling me what to do. They just kept asking me questions. And I kept getting really impatient and annoyed with the process, but later learned that this was something called coaching, and later saw the really long-term value of it because it drove a lot of intrinsic motivation for change rather than a kind of short-term hit to kind of band-aid over problems. And so just got very curious about the process as I started leading bigger and bigger teams and more complex kind of organizations. I also then started realizing that the people on my team knew way more than I did about the thing they were there to do. So I realized I had no business telling someone who's leading my business in Korea how to build a business in Korea. But what I could do was ask them questions to unlock the insights and help them figure out what they wanted to do. And so coaching just became a very natural part of my leadership style, and I just kept practicing the craft and just really developed a deep interest in it. And so just over the last few years, really started to spend more time and energy in this area. I think we've all benefited from, particularly in Singapore, a massive explosion of capital and first-time founders over the last 10 years. And so it's just been great to have a front row seat to see very talented people with very big ambitions who are open to learning. And so that's been just a great recipe for coaching to develop. So yeah, currently working as a venture builder at Manyala, which is a Temasek-backed venture studio. We're trying to build some really exciting companies over the next few years. And so coaching is just a very powerful tool because, again, it would be slightly stupid, honestly, to try and tell some of these entrepreneurs what to do. But what a lot of them need is a partner. They need someone to talk to. Sometimes they can't talk to the board. Sometimes they can't talk to their executive team. But they just need someone to sense check. And as a big kind of martial arts fan myself, I think of it as like a sparring partner where we can learn from each other, ask questions, and figure out the way. So that for me is coaching. I get a joy from seeing people uncap their potential and see things that and do things that they didn't think were possible. And yeah, that's what energizes me to do this.
Thank you, Parin, and I really love the definition of being a sparring partner, being here for people and for them to have a safe space. Okay, Rob, how about you? What brought you here today?
So I guess my journey started with wanting to be an entrepreneur for a long time, having, as I call it, the itch. But I was, like many people, in a good job. I was a strategy consultant, well paid. It was interesting. And eventually I took the plunge and I started a business which, although outwardly it looked like a venture capital business, it really was an operating company. It was a venture builder. We had 140 people in 14 countries. And I was running that business. So I had an outing as a operator of a startup. And I also had a perch into the companies that we were building and investing in. We had 27 investments. And I think the short version of that period is I got a PhD in what not to do as a founder entrepreneur. Like there was just, this is early 2000s. Honestly, like the world has come a long way since then, I think, in terms of understanding how to build these businesses. And then I went and I left that company and I started a fintech company of my own, which I think I'd like to hope was much better. It was quite successful and I think reasonably well run. So I had that experience. And then the third kind of pivotal moment was I sold the company and I joined a private equity firm and I absolutely hated it because everything was a number. And I had come as a founder CEO to recognize that most things are not really about numbers. They're about the people that, generate those numbers. And so I got interested in working with the portfolio company CEOs. And one day the head of the firm came and said, "Oh, I hear you're doing nice job of coaching them." And I didn't know anything about coaching, but I thought, well, coaching is about people, not numbers. So I trained as a coach. And then about 13 years ago, moved to Singapore, and that's when I became a full-time coach. So that was kind of the origin story, really, is just like, please don't screw up the way all these other folks have and the way I did in my first outing. And I think the second part of the journey was I started working with, early stage founders, and then their companies grew and their needs changed. And when you're working with a small company, working with just the founder can be a big impact, and can be very important. But at some point, I realized, and I think Dee realized, it's actually not about me anymore. It's about the organization as a whole. And whether you're at 50 people or 500 or 5,000, at some point, the CEO can only do so much. And so I got very interested in thinking about how you coach the organization, not just the individual. And that led me to do work with teams and teams of teams and cross-functional and various things. So that's my journey. It was really at the grace of my clients who allowed me to kind of travel with them for a while and watch the story unfold. And that was super, super interesting.
Thank you very much, Rob. And I'm going to jump on this PhD of what not to do. I love this one. And I'm going to ask you, so if there were 3 things not to do and things that you've learned through your experience and coaching founders, what would it be? What would they be?
For me? Number 1, don't believe blitz scaling is the right strategy for all companies. Like we've all been taught this narrative in the last few years of raise as much money as you can, grow as fast as you can, use that to justify as high valuation as you can, then raise more money. I think that was a wrong narrative for 90% of the companies out there, and it diverted CEOs' attention from thinking about the quality of the organization, the quality of the work they were doing, the quality of the products and services, the quality of the culture. It became quantity is everything and quality is nothing. So I think that is not a helpful construct. The second thing I think that's often a problem is, founders want to go fast, like I get it. And they find that the fewer people they deal with on an issue, the faster they can go. So if a finance issue comes up and Parin is my finance guy, I'll talk to him. And if marketing issue, then I'll talk to Geraldine. She's my marketing person. And team meetings are kind of, they're slow. They feel cumbersome. They're a waste of time. And so there's a lot of what I call bilateral or transactional sort of leadership. And there's a place for that, but there's also a cost to that. And so the second thing I would say is understand that your organization as it grows gets deeply interconnected in ways that you don't understand. And what's efficient for you as CEO actually creates a lot of problems for the rest of the organization, but you don't see those problems. So you just have to kind of tune in to the fact that organizations are complex systems and kind of think about them in that way and not just in terms of the quality or the efficiency of your individual interactions. I'll stop at 2. That's enough. Those are 2. If you can get those 2 right, that's a good start.
All right. Thank you very much, Rob. How about you, Parin? What would you share?
So this is mistakes as a coach or mistakes that you see in founders? Mistakes
that as a founders that you've seen while coaching founders, or you as an entrepreneur as well?
Yeah, I think of this more, not necessarily mistakes, because I believe there's kind of generally good intent, but more in kind of trade-offs that go wrong, or getting the trade-offs slightly wrong. And so I think there's a couple of paradoxes that I see that at any given time someone might get wrong. So the first one is just really balancing patience and impatience, right? I think that's a huge one where, how do you know when to slow down and let things play out versus how do you know when to speed up and really drive kind of inputs? And that, some of that ties to what you were saying, Rob, about blitz scaling and taking advantage of the environment. So I think that's one. I think the other one is, just around this trade-off between process and creativity. I've seen a lot of people institute kind of big company infrastructure into a 10-person startup. But I've also seen people refuse to put even weekly meetings in a 300 or 400 person startup. So just figuring out the kind of the trade-off between those 2 angles is really important. And I think the third thing is just not looking after oneself. So just doing the basics, right? Nutrition, getting good sleep, having like human connection with friends and family, et cetera, and making short-term decisions to trade off on some of that stuff, and then paying for it long term. So yeah, those would be the 3 kind of big areas that I'm generally checking for.
All right.
And also, I should add mistakes I've made myself.
All right, thank you. So trade-off between patience, impatience, between process, creativity, and really caring about yourself and your health and mental health. All right, thank you very much for sharing. How would you describe your coaching approach, Rob?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think any good coach varies their style a lot depending on the client and what their needs are. I have coaches where I'm clients where I'm deep in their heads and we're doing work that's a little bit on the border of psychotherapy, and clients where we're dealing with very practical issues. But I think in the scale-up world, while there is a lot about the individual and their mindset and the way they frame things, the kind of classic coaching questions, the patterns of thought, there's also the system, right? The organization. And so a lot of my work is helping them to up what I call their organizational intelligence, their OQ, right? Learning how to think more systemically and how to read the organization the same way they read their P&L and their project. They're deep in the weeds on all their OKRs and updates, and they've got lots of information reaching them about where the problems are in the business. But I want them to also be attentive to where the problems are in the organization and to help them develop that skill. And that's a bit of a nuanced thing. So very often we're talking about how they grow their OQ and become more effective, I would say, true leaders and true institution builders in a scaling environment.
Thank you, really. Thank you. So huge focus on OQ. I love this concept of OQ. Thank you for sharing that, Rob. How about you, Parin? How would you describe your approach as a coach?
So I think everything has to start with curiosity, right? And assuming you don't know anything. And I think the lever we have as coaches to find out more is great questions. So that's generally where I start. Over the last couple of years, somewhere I've just tried to dial up a little bit and improve is something I learned from Airbnb, actually, which is this idea of being bold and compassionate at the same time. And so what that means is, and if I use the analogy of a sparring partner, sometimes you have to know when to be comforting and compassionate and ask slightly softer questions. But also sometimes you have to know when to be very direct and almost a bit of a pain to the other person and really help them confront some things. And I think regulating both those behaviors, and sometimes in the same session and sometimes in different sections of the same session, is really important. So yeah, but I would say everything starts with curiosity and just over time learning to remove your own biases and just really thinking through, like, am I getting the whole context of the situation here or not?
All right, curiosity and context. Thank you, Parin. How do you balance? Thank you, Parin. And I have a question. We have many coaches today, and this is a question we always ask ourselves. How do you balance providing guidance, advice, and coaching? How do you manage this? Yeah,
I mean, this is a very tough one. I think, and Rob, you probably have the same experience, especially if you've been an operator, and especially if you're type A and impatient like I am. There's always a tendency to solve a problem, right? Like, let me just give you the answer because then we can both move on and get on with this. And I think it takes a lot of work to self-regulate as a coach and not try and dial into that tendency. And so one of the tools I just really use is really just asking myself, what's the best possible question in this moment, rather than what's the best possible thing to say or thing to tell. And so, yeah, we're just really going back to high quality questions over and over again, and thinking through, what might this look like if we were to discover a great insight together with the coachee? And then how might that help them take action on it? And then how might they build some intrinsic motivation around that case for change? So I think in many ways, and this was kind of one of the mistakes I mentioned before, it's sometimes you have to trade off some of that short-term kind of dopamine hit of solving a problem for that long-term satisfaction in helping someone actually get to where they want to get to. It's hard. It's very hard.
It's hard indeed. And I love this way of framing it. What is the best quality question? Great one. How about you, Rob? How do you balance?
I think it's a really, really important one. I think many people have had the experience that Parin described, where your coach is just asking you questions, and at some point you want to throttle them and say, can you please give me some advice? So there was something I learned in my coach training. I couldn't train with you because I did it before you were around, but and they said very simple, it's okay to offer a piece of advice. It's not okay to hold on to it, right? You just put it out there as if you're offering something in your hand. If they pick it up, great. If they don't pick it up, no problem. That's fine. What's not okay is to then say, no, you have to come back and listen to my advice. You didn't get it. And so that has helped me in moments where I've got that thing going in my head saying, I don't want to ask a question. I have something to offer here. And I think it generally works quite well for clients if you really stick to that principle that you have to read the body language. You'll see very quickly if it's meaningful to them or not. And if it is, that's great. You can follow that thread. And if not, then you move on.
Thank you, Rob. And that's an amazing tip. We already get a lot of amazing tips, but maybe you can share if there's one tip you received as a coach that really helped you. What was it? Maybe Parin, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, maybe Geraldine, I'll embarrass you for a second because I actually just relearned this from you recently. But and it's very important actually. It's coach the person and their relation to the problem and not just the problem. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important because if you take the context we're all in, right, we've just come out of this global pandemic. We're revenge traveling, we're revenge dating, we're revenge whatever we're doing, we're revenge parenting, we're trying to do it all. And just really taking the time to understand that context and frame a problem that someone might be sharing against the experiences that they've had is very important. And I think it's just a deeper way of coaching. So the kind of easy way out or the kind of more shallow tendency might be just to try and solve the problem. Like, I'm trying to expand my company. How do I do that? Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? But I think the deeper question is, why is this important to you? What is it about your background that makes international expansion important to you? And just going slightly level deeper. And when you do that really well, sometimes you'll uncover deeper root causes that are just below the surface level. And that again drives back to some of that intrinsic motivation, right? Because if this bias for change is rooted in someone's personal values, it's more likely to stick over the long term. So yeah, I think it's really that idea of the person to the problem and not just the problem.
Yeah, thank you, Parin. And this is a great tip. And this is something, this is from Marcia Reynolds, just an amazing book, Coach a Person, Not the Problem. And please read it if it's not done yet. How about you, Rob? What would be the one tip?
I think the most important tip I ever got was essentially self-management. I think like many coaches, I wear multiple hats. I'm a chairman of a company. I'm on a board of a company. I can be adrenaline driven and all that stuff, which is not a good place to show up from in coaching. And so the discipline of taking 5 minutes before every session to just, close my eyes, take some deep breaths. I wouldn't call it meditation. It's just my own little ritual. But I'm always amazed at how differently I emerge at the end of that, even if it's 1 minute, than how I felt going in. And I think it changes the way the energy starts in the room when you're with your client. So it's that.
Thank you, Rob. And so we're talking about coaching. We're going to talk about founders. But before we move to founders, I'd love to ask you, what do you think makes a great coach for startup founders? Rob, if you want to answer this one first.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that it depends a little bit on the stage of company and the nature of the coaching relationship. I do think that in the early stages in particular, it can be enormously, psychologically taxing, right? You've given up a job, you don't have any income, your spouse is worried that this whole thing is going to come crashing down. There's a lot of intermixing of the personal and the professional. And that, emotional support is a big part of the job. The care part that Parin mentioned it can be a big part. And then I think, for example, the thing that Parin mentioned of getting that sort of speed versus patience, right? Like they're just finding the rhythm of how they're going to run their company. If they try to do everything at 100 miles an hour, it's not going to work. But if there's no urgency, it's not going to work. So some of those things. And then I think later on, a lot of it is about how you get them to do less, honestly, because most coaches most CEOs do a bit of everything. It's natural, right? And at the start, you're essentially a individual contributor, you're just getting shit done. Then you've got a team and you're more kind of sitting on top of things. Like I call it the making sure shit gets done stage. But the founders who burn out are partly burned out because they don't build an organization that can get shit done on their behalf. They make themselves integral to everything that is happening. And of course, it's partly about the quality and the strength of people that you are able to attract, and that there's some external factors, but a lot of it is mindset. And so I think when you help them understand that everything gets better when they go home at 7 at night, like nothing, their personal lives, their the sustainability of their own life, and of the business all get better, and that's a process. So helping them to not be the solution to every problem in their organization. But that's a very addictive place for a founder. I like doing that. I mean, it's very addictive. People bring you problems and you solve them. And you get a dopamine hit. You feel really good. Oh, I solved a problem. Yeah, that's good. And your people like it too, because it's kind of like respectful. Oh, I brought the boss a problem. He solved it for me. He feels good. I feel good. Everybody's happy. Not bringing him the problem is like, that's a whole different vibe. So yeah, it's an interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's the addiction, huh? That's indeed very interesting and make it complex and complicated. How about you, Parin?
Not really much to add beyond what Rob said. I think the one thing we can all do for people in the very early stage is often just sit and listen without judgment. And it sounds like a very simple thing, but my experience has suggested that at the early stage, a lot of founders are they're constantly being barraged by asks from everyone around them, whether it's the board, whether it's their team, whether it's, inevitably people they might be letting down in their personal life because they're so focused on the startup. And so just being one person who they can sit down with for an hour and just be heard and just be understood without judgment, I think is just a really great place to start, because from there you can build some trust, you can build some vulnerability, and then natural areas of exploration will emerge from there. So yeah, I like to generally keep it very simple at the beginning and just listen and see. And it just all goes back to this idea of just being super curious at the beginning.
Thank you. And indeed, it's very rare and it's totally underrated indeed. Now, would you mind sharing a success story without breaching any confidentiality, obviously, but Rob, if you can share one of your success story while you were coaching founder or team.
Sure. So, I mean, I think if you're a truly amazing founder leader, you probably don't need a coach, and that's great. That's fine. And honestly, there are some who are struggling even with the benefit of better coaches than me. I find the sweet spot is with people who are already pretty good leaders. And sometimes it's just one or two things and you unlock that and their way and you can feel the progress. So they were strong leaders to begin with, but there's something getting in the way. And so I had a case, I can name the company. I think he's would be fine with it. I checked. The company is actually in Myanmar, of all places. It's the leading fintech in Myanmar. It's called Wave Money. Very successful. Not very well known because they didn't raise venture, but highly profitable, the dominant fintech in Myanmar. And the CEO, who is an Australian fellow, ex-Australian Army, really experienced, really good, well-rounded, but boy, was he driving the weekly performance drum, the drumbeat of weekly operational performance numbers. And there were other problems in the organization that were deeper rooted. And it's not that he wasn't kind of aware of them, but he just needed to step back and create a little more space for those other issues, organizational issues, some strategy issues, but in particular organizational issues, to come to bubble up and to get attention. And he was very capable of addressing them or helping coach other people. But that led to making some changes in the team, some reorg, a change in the executive and then the company really took off. So it was just an over focus on the day-to-day and the tangible results, and a kind of under focus on some of the enabling conditions that let the company let the organization fly, right? Because again, it's that output versus input focus and getting that balance right.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. How about you, Parin? Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, of course. So I think of these as there's some intangible wins and some tangible wins. So I'll start with the tangibles because they're pretty straightforward. I think exits are always great, right? For a founder, it's ultimately what everyone's looking for. And as an extension of an exit, being able to do it without compromising on the mission or the vision of the company. So I think those are always really great outcomes, particularly for young founders, because that ability for them to change their personal circumstances and then still have 30, 40, 50-year runway to really go and do something interesting in the world. I think that always really excites me. So those are always great. On the intangibles, I really enjoy the situations where someone is completely able to uncap their potential in an area where they previously thought it was impossible. And so a couple of examples of this is really strong operators who are just very poor communicators, who 1 year later, you see them as the most charismatic man or woman on the planet, right? Just because of some small shifts in behavior. Other ones are people who previously thought of themselves as low on EQ, or maybe as Rob calls it, the organizational intelligence. But after 1 or 2 years of some deep reflection and work, almost become like best in class at how to build talent, how to develop talent, how to scale organizations. So I really love those kind of personal transformation stories where someone previously considered themselves to be weak in an area, and then 1 or 2 years later is actually the shining star on how to do it well.
How do you manage to do that? I mean, there's no short answers to that, but there's...
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we'd be giving ourselves as coaches way too much credit if we said it was the coach. I think there has to be a motivation for change in a person, right? And so I think just showing them a path on how to do reflection, how to ask those questions at the right time, how to really help them get concrete on where they are today, where they want to be, and what the gap is, and how to close some of that gap, I think is really important.
Okay. Are all founders coachable, Parin?
No. I don't think all people are coachable, and that's okay. Would I want to coach Elon Musk? Probably not. Does Elon Musk need coaching? Probably not. So I don't think they are. And then also, not all founders are coachable by every person. And I think that chemistry between the coach and the coachee is very, very important. And so there might often be times where I meet someone, they're coachable, they're outstanding, I'm just probably not the right fit for them. And then I'll recommend them to someone else who would be just a much better fit, both for the coach and coachee.
And how do you assess, Parin, how do you assess the coachability during this chemistry session? How do you know?
Yeah, so I'm kind of looking for a couple of behaviors. One, I'm looking for some motivation for change, to take the current situation and change it into another situation. I'm looking for some ability to be a really good sparring partner. So what I mean by that is they have the ability to listen, but they also have the ability to push back and be really clear on where they're not willing to make trade-offs or compromises or take on my suggestions. So those are the two main areas: is really good sparring partner, and then that kind of motivation for change.
Thank you, Parin. How about you, Rob? How do you assess the fit and coachability?
Yeah, I think their ability to listen. There are some founders who are just so adrenaline up, I guess is the phrase I'd use, that they're almost interrupting themselves, they're interrupting me. If a problem doesn't have a solution in the next 20 seconds, you can feel their attention drifting away. So there are, I think, founders who are, as there are in the corporate world, people who are, I think Patrick Lencioni calls it, addicted to adrenaline and addicted to numbers. And if it doesn't have a number and it doesn't involve adrenaline, it's kind of not very interesting. And sort of that deeper reflection of other things, whether it's about themselves or their organization, is hard for them. And then, yeah, I mean, the sort of asking of questions, the pushing back, the saying, well, I like kind of what you say, but I don't really see it that way. Like, okay, that's somebody coachable, because they're engaging, right? They're engaging in a conversation. The other thing that, I mean, I just separately, it's not really to do with founders, but there is a category of people that I have found almost uncoachable, and you don't know it until you're deep in, and they're narcissists. They're very good at playing the game, right? They tell you all the lovely things you want to hear about whatever, and they play the game because that's what they do. And hopefully over time, you start getting, it's just a feeling that even though they're playing the game and saying, oh, I love that insight, that's brilliant, you realize it's all bullshit and none of it has any meaning to them.
Thank you, Rob. So we talked about success. Let's talk about failures. So failure is very common in the startup world, scale-up world. So how do you manage that? How do you help founders navigate setbacks and failures and mental health challenges as well? Rob, if you can take this one.
I mean, I've had plenty of failure in my life, and I've had to, reinvent myself a few times. So I guess partly it's just the having been there and having been in that situation. I don't think there is a magic way to help people, because I think when people are in pain or under distress, it becomes very, very particular to them. Like everybody's happy in the same way on an exit, and everybody's in pain in a different way. And so that's where I think parents, just the listening, the questioning, the just letting them get it out there. I had one client call me in the middle of the night, and she was suicidal. And I was way above my pay grade. I'm not a therapist. I thought, I have no idea how to deal with this. I also thought, I can't tell them, sorry, I can't help you, and hang up, because how is that going to help, right? So, you learn real quickly in those moments that what you do is you listen, and you're calm, and you're sort of gentle and supportive, and you don't try to fix anything. But I think it is it's a very individual thing. And sometimes they need a different kind of help at that point. Maybe
Yes.
from their spouse, maybe from a therapist, maybe from a personal trainer to get them, going again physically, many different things.
Thank you, Rob. How about you, Parin?
Yeah, there's a very simple question that I just keep coming back to over and over and over again, both for myself and people I coach, which is what's in your control and what's not in your control. And I think we all, there's a human tendency to sometimes delude ourselves about trying to control things that we don't control, and then being blasé about the things we actually control and let them go. And so that's always a question I'm generally going back to is, where do you truly have the power and influence to change something that you don't like? It's kind of a very fundamental question. The other thing is just the basics, right? Like the number of us who are on any given day dehydrated, sleep deprived. If you've got young kids like I am, that's most of the time. What are we doing to just look after the basics, right? Are we eating properly? Are we sleeping well? Are we taking care of the basics that help us show up for ourselves and our teams every day? So I'm always kind of curious about whether that level of activity is also going on, and try to some degree to be an accountability partner, right? To someone and say, I'm not your mother or father, but let's just get the basics done first, then we can be in a better position to problem solve.
Geraldine? She has a slightly dodgy Wi-Fi. She's not just holding that perfect expression for the sake of it. Oh no, we've lost our moderator.
Well, what we could do, we could freestyle this, Rob. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I see there's one from Reza. Maybe I'll ask it to you, Rob. Hi, Rob. How did you triage and diagnose the issue with the Wave Money founder CEO efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, again, this comes back to this sense of what I would call OQ, which I think I have some of. The old thing where doctors were taught to palpate. You sort of probe and you touch different parts of the body and you see whether somebody is healthy. I'm a big believer in palpating the organization, right? You just go out and you talk to people, you just sort of ask them questions. How's this going? What's on your mind? What's working? What's not working? You observe them. So I was doing team coaching with Wave Money, and you're seeing the interactions. And I had been told about some of these points, and so I guess I was already alerted to them, but it's just a feeling that you sense, okay, there's something it's stuck here, right? It's not flowing the way you'd expect. There's a stuckness to it. And you then ask them, what is that? Like, why are we not making progress? Why is this debate keep coming back? Why do there seem to be two camps? You know, what is the nature of the stuckness? And you know, what I think is that there are some business problems which are, to your point, completely outside of our control. There's a change in the regulatory environment. Okay, we got to huddle and figure out how to deal with it. But most business problems are, in a sense, a symptom of an underlying organizational problem. Like, we wouldn't have had that problem if we'd had better people, or people working better together, or better insights, or more clarity. So a lot of the business problems that come up have this other mirror side to them, which is that they're symptoms of a deeper rooted organization. And so I call that being the two-eyed CEO. Yeah, look at the business problem, but look at the other side too. And if you're only ever looking at the business side, then you're systematically ignoring those root causes. So, hello.
Hello, I'm back. I don't know what was the question.
We were
Can you hear me
freestyling.
now? Yes, thank you. I'm sure I was not stressed about that, but it was my best question, so I'm gonna ask it again. So, and before last question, before we take questions from you guys, the audience. So, what is the one question you want me to ask, and that I didn't ask yet, Parin?
Good question. I think there's a really fundamental question which comes up for a lot of new coaches, which is, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring?
And what's the answer?
All right,
Yes.
so let's ask this one to Rob.
Oh no. What's the difference? I mean, I think most of the people on this call, many are coaches, and will have some sense of the, you know, mentoring is speaking from experience, offering advice. Coaches are more speaking from curiosity and asking questions. I think in real life, most good mentors do quite a bit of coaching, and many coaches do quite a bit of mentoring, and that's okay. I think that like any good coach, what you're really doing is reading your client. And if you start offering advice and you see their body language sort of shut down a little bit, you know you're on the wrong footing, like shut up and ask more questions, and vice versa. You can be asking perfect coaching questions, and your client can be squirming, thinking this is all a bit, you know, too coachy and a bit too theoretical. So I think it's that idea of being in the moment with your client, trying to read the body language and just asking them, is this working? What's, you know, what do you need out of this session? So I think that rather than having strict adherence to a protocol that's called coaching or mentoring, it's more just trying to be responsive to the client and their needs. And that can change day to day, session to session, or even within a session.
Thank you, Rob. Do you want to add anything, Parin, to this?
No, I think that was spot on. I mean, the very basics. I think mentoring is a lot of telling, coaching is a lot of asking.
Indeed. And how about you, Rob? If there's one question I didn't ask and you wanted me to ask, what would it be?
So the question is, what's the one tool or framework? It was on your list of questions, yes, that I love the most. And it's the one I just mentioned, so the one I call the T2CO. It's the simple question. Okay, you're facing a business problem. What is the organizational weakness that is at the root cause of that? And can you think about that? So why might this have presented itself, and what does that tell you? And that can be a weakness in, as I said, a team or a person or a way of working. It can be just that the whole organization is overramped to growth and not enough to, building process or quality of work. But it's just learning to always see business results as outcomes of human behavior and not separate those two.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so we're going to take questions. So please write in the chat. Just very quickly before, how do you see the future of coaching, Parin and Rob?
So maybe I'll give an answer and then I'll give a devil's advocate answer to my own answer. Look, I think, insert buzzword, right? Web3, AI, whatever, these are all going to be things that take coaching to the next level in terms of frequency of interaction and quality of interaction. But I do believe there will always be a place for a human one-to-one connect. And the analogy I would use is similar to the music industry, where we can all listen to Taylor Swift on Spotify all day long, but we're also all clamoring to get concert tickets when she shows up in our city. And so I kind of think of coaching as the same. I could see a lot of long tail, very in the moment interactions available to anyone at any time in the day. But I could see someone having the need once in a while to sit down with a qualified and capable coach to really go a little bit deeper.
Thank you, Parin. How about you, Rob?
So I had a moment with ChatGPT, many moments, as I'm sure you all did, where you just thought, oh my God, I am in the future. But one of the things that I believe is to be generally true is that we can all get triggered at home with our spouses, with our partners, at work. And at that moment, all the skills and all the coaching of how to have a constructive go out the window. And you just want to, rage. And it's very hard as a coach to penetrate that because you have all that physiology of the amygdala hijack and all that stuff. But if instead of going and shouting at your spouse, you shout into ChatGPT and you say, I'm so damn frustrated because she just did it again. And I told her not to do that. And I'm so pissed off and it's ridiculous. And honestly, I'm just fed up. But I don't want to say that to her. So can you please tell me how to speak to my wife in a constructive way and yet raise this issue? It will be perfect. I mean, you can tell it to use nonviolent communication protocols or anything you like, and you'll get this amazing. And so it has that double effect of interrupting you in the moment where you might rage. Already your system is settling, right? And you're becoming a little less reactive. It empathizes with you and it says, yes, that must be really frustrating. And then it gives you this beautiful language that you can use. So I'm fascinated to see how real-time interaction problems might get mediated by technology, I guess.
Thank you.
Super weird, obscure, but very interesting area.
Indeed. All right, let's take questions. So we have some questions in the chat. Some have been answered already. Maybe the one from anyone. Feel free to share questions in the chat. I'm going to pick some of them. One from Anne-Christine. So what do you do when you feel that there is no progress with a client? How do you get this situation unstuck? So who wants to take this one?
Yeah, I can take this one because I'm just dealing with a situation right now. I kind of look at this as not necessarily a bad thing. I kind of look at it as the way we might graduate from a school or a course. And sometimes I think there's just a natural end in that engagement between the coach and the coachee. And so I generally try and pick up on the signal and take the hint and just have a candid conversation and say, look, this doesn't look like it's working for you, or it might not be working for me. What do you want to do about it? Can I recommend you to someone else? Is there something more specific you're looking for? Do you think it's better that we re-engage at a later time and just have a very honest conversation about it? What I generally try not to do is force coaching. Like I genuinely believe it's not something you should try and sell. I think the conditions have to be right for it to be productive. And so if those are not there, then I think it's better to take a pause.
Thank you very much. Let's take another question from Coach Devang. How do you explain the importance of coaching to startup founders? Rob, you want to take this one?
I don't think I would, because I think it would come across as sort of selling. And I think that, people find their moment. I think everybody needs a coach, but not all the time, right? There's a moment where you need it, and you need to know what that moment is. And so I think they're just saying, here's this thing called coaching, here's how people can use it, here's the kinds of situations. So an educational process is fine. But I think, Perrin said earlier, and I totally agree with this, the number one predictor of success in coaching is how much people want to end up in a different place. If they're happy with where they are, they shouldn't have a coach, and you won't accomplish anything. And so it's just saying these are the kinds of ways in which coaching can help, and then let them figure out whether they need it or not.
Thank you, Rob. And we have a question for Afia from Afia. Do you have about to say anything to new coaches who are struggling to attract clients? So you are very successful coaches. So what would be the one tip? So I see parents saying pick a niche. Anything else?
Yeah, I would say be patient, right? Like, this is something where it's based on trust and vulnerability, and you don't earn those overnight. It has to compound over many, many years, and one mistake and you're in trouble. So I think just be patient, try and put the work in to let people know what you offer, but also don't be too pushy about it. And I think over time, once you've discovered a niche and you've delighted some people in that niche, I think things will come.
Thank you, Parrin. Rob, anything to add on that? It's one of the biggest pain points for coaches.
It is. I mean, it raises a related question, which is, what is the relationship between coaching craft skills, which most people can learn, and experience and credibility, which obviously have more to do with your history prior to coming to a coach? And I really believe they're not closely connected. You can have amazing coaches who are 28 years old and have very little experience. And you can have people with great experience who don't have good coaching skills, but people need both and deserve both, right? I mean, there's just no question that if you're the CEO, you want to feel that the person you're sitting across from has credibility, and that it helps you to overcome your initial concerns about, is this a good use of time? So I think the question, to ask yourself is partly, where do I play, really, to be realistic about who would find me credible, not because of my beautiful coaching skills, which I learned from Geraldine or whatever, but because I also have life experience, professional experience that will matter to them. It's not that I'm mentoring them, but it will seem relevant. So I think there's, we like to pretend that doesn't matter in coaching because the craft is a craft, but I think it does matter.
Thank you very much, Rob. And so we have 2 minutes left. So we're going to close the session now. Thank you, everybody, for being engaged and sharing your questions, your insights. Thank you very much, Parrin and Rob, for taking the time and sharing your experience, your expertise today. If there's one thing you want to share to close this session, what would it be? Parrin?
Ask great questions all the time.
Thank you very much. Ask great questions all the time. Thank you very much. Parrin, how about you, Rob?
Yeah, probe the system around the founder. If you're coaching the founder, even if it's informally, talk to the other folks in the system, the co-founders for sure, senior people, maybe a board member, and just feel what's going on, because they can have quite skewed senses of what's happening, both in terms of their impact and what's happening in the company.
All right, thank you very much, and we can't wait, Rob, to read your book, Smooth Scaling: 20 Rituals to Build a Friction-Free Organization. And please make sure you connect, you subscribe to Parrin's newsletter to learn and grow as coaches and founders. Thank you very much. Also, feel free to connect with them on LinkedIn and connect with us as well at Go Master Coach. Do not hesitate to ask if you want to become coaches to connect with us. We host master classes to explain how to become coaches, and you're welcome to join. The next one is in August, on the 9th of August. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, a good evening, and see you soon.
Thank you,
guys.
Geraldine.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks,
That was
Charlie.
fun.
Thank you. Thank you very much.